Instead of trying to provide answers to every problem, learn to ask questions that make others stop and think. That is one of the most important lines in the coaching habit. Say less, ask more, and change the way you lead forever by Michael Bungay Stanier. A slim yet sharp book, written not to teach how to lead others, but to help people relearn how to talk to themselves and the world around them. This book begins with a paradox. The more you try to help, the easier it is to become controlling. While thinking we are leading, we inadvertently strip others of the opportunity to grow. With 7 surprisingly simple questions, the author opens another door. A place where leadership is no longer about giving orders, but about knowing how to inspire. Where power lies not in knowledge, but in the ability to make others see knowledge within themselves. What's compelling about this book isn't its theories or processes, but how it forces readers to be honest with themselves. Everyone thinks they know how to listen, but few truly listen. Everyone believes they are helping, but sometimes it's just a way to avoid feeling helpless when there's no solution. The coaching habit doesn't preach or pontificate. It merely asks questions, yet each question is like a mirror reflecting the restlessness, haste, and habit of talking too much in modern times. Perhaps what makes this book so deeply impressive is how it reverses our familiar positions in communication. The intelligent person here is no longer the eloquent speaker, but the one who knows when to be silent. The great leader isn't someone with far-reaching vision, but someone who dares to step back to let others step forward. And then, amidst lines seemingly meant for management, a question appears that makes anyone ponder. If words are tools for connection, why do people become more distant the more they talk? Perhaps the answer lies in what this book emphasizes throughout its more than 200 pages. True change doesn't begin when we talk more, but when we learn to ask fewer, but deeper questions. In a world where everyone is so busy they no longer recognize they are truly living, there is a silent habit that dominates all: the habit of reacting. People ask, we answer. They cry for help, we rush in to solve. They look at us, we immediately try to prove our usefulness. Throughout years of working with leaders, I realized that most of them don't lack knowledge, but rather the space to pause and ask the most important question: why must we do everything for others? We live in an era of advice, packed meetings, endless emails, and strategies written only to be forgotten as soon as they're sent. And in that chaotic mess, one thing becomes clear: we are accustomed to doing, but we forget to ask. Everyone talks about process, everyone talks about inspiring leadership. But when I observe closely, I only see tired faces trying to control everything, while they themselves are no longer led by anything. I once heard a psychologist say that a leader who doesn't know how to ask will eventually be consumed by their own words. I didn't believe it immediately, until I witnessed hundreds of good managers collapse into the vicious cycles they created themselves. The first cycle is fostering dependency. The more they help, the weaker the team becomes. The more they guide, the more lost others become. Then one day they realize the entire department can only function when they are there, and everything collapses when they leave. The second cycle is overwhelm. Because when every problem comes to you, you quickly become the bottleneck of the system. Every decision awaits your approval. Every project stops in your absence. The feeling of being needed makes you feel important, but gradually, it becomes a burden, making every workday feel like running on wet sand. The harder you try, the deeper you sink. And the final cycle is losing connection to meaning. You become so busy that you no longer remember why you once loved this job. Everything becomes mechanical. Goals that once excited you are now just a long, endless list to complete. When work no longer touches the heart, it becomes a series of lifeless reactions. It was in moments like these that I realized coaching is not a skill to teach others, but a way to give them back the power to discover themselves. You don't need lengthy conversations, just 10 minutes or less if you know how to ask the right questions. Coaching is not a performance by the intelligent, but the art of helping others find their own answers. I remember when I started this journey, many were skeptical. They said, "We've already been trained in coaching." But the numbers told a different story. Most training programs fail because they teach theory without teaching how to turn it into a habit. The problem isn't a lack of knowledge, but not knowing where to start or how to sustain it. All change dies young if it doesn't become an automatic response. That's when I realized, to make coaching a daily habit, we must start by understanding how a habit is formed. not with slogans or thick action plans, but with a small question. How will we act in the moment when a choice is truly needed? A university study showed that nearly half of human behavior occurs unconsciously. We think we control ourselves, but we are actually slaves to a repetitive chain of reactions. We open our phones as soon as we wake up, unconsciously reply to emails, nod when someone asks for help, and then complain about having no time. Habit is the invisible thread that shapes our entire lives. To change, we must find the starting point of that thread. The reason, the trigger, the small action, the practice method, and the recovery plan. First, a strong enough reason is needed. Don't start because you should do things differently, but because there is something or someone worth your effort. I once knew a man who quit smoking not for his own health, but because he wanted fresh breath when he kissed his first child. Sustainable changes are always linked to love, not just willpower. Next is the trigger. If you don't know when you fall into old behaviors, you'll never fix them. Observe. When do you start giving orders instead of asking? When interrupted? When tired? When afraid of losing control? Only by recognizing that moment can you choose to act differently. Then, a small and specific action. Every great habit begins with a small movement. Don't try to become a good listener in one day. Just practice being silent for 10 more seconds after each question. Do the smallest thing you cannot make an excuse to refuse. Once you've started, don't seek perfection. Seek consistency. Deep practice isn't blind repetition, but observing each attempt to adjust. Every time you ask a question and the other person truly stops to think, that's when you are making progress. And if you forget, don't blame yourself. Failure doesn't destroy a habit, only giving up does. Prepare in advance how to get back on track, like a trail you can still find even if you get lost. I often encapsulate this entire formula in a single sentence. When this happens, instead of the old reaction, I will do this differently. For example, when an employee comes asking for advice, instead of immediately offering a solution, ask, "What do you think about it?" Just one question, but it creates a huge difference. It shifts the mindset from control to trust, from command to dialogue. Every revolution starts with a small action. And this is a silent revolution. Instead of telling, ask. Instead of ordering, be curious. Instead of proving, explore. Coaching is not a method, but an attitude to life. And when you are ready to step into the world of questions, remember the first lesson, a lesson so simple that everyone thinks they know it, but almost no one truly does. Ask just one question. I once likened the feeling of being bombarded with questions to driving through the Arc de Triomphe roundabout. 12 roads converging, horns blaring, chaos in every direction. Many leaders say they are having a conversation, but in reality they are firing off questions, leaving the listener no time to breathe. One good question is better than 10 trivial ones. Ask once, then be silent. In that silence, the other person truly begins to think. Why do we fear silence? Because it makes us lose control. But it is precisely when we pause that the power of the question begins to spread. A well-placed silence can change an entire conversation. So practice this small habit. After you've just asked a question, gently tell yourself, don't say anything else. Just sit there, look at the person in front of you, and let them find their own words. Sometimes, the best thing you can give someone else is enough quiet space for them to hear their own voice. That's when coaching truly begins. When the other person starts to answer your question, don't be quick to believe they've hit the core. Most people only speak the surface layer of the problem, like a dim cave mouth that doesn't yet lead to the deepest part. They tell what's easy to tell, say what's safe, and sometimes they don't even realize what they truly want to say. If you stop there, the conversation will only be a shallow ripple. But if you know how to ask one more question, you will lead them deeper into their own inner world. That's why I call "and what else?" the most powerful question in any dialogue. 3 seemingly simple words, yet they contain the power to open countless doors. When you say, "And what else?" you are saying, "Go on, I'm still here." You don't push, you don't judge, you just open up more space for the other person to explore. The strange thing is that it is in these moments that they begin to find truly important ideas. Most wrong decisions start from having only 2 choices, do or don't do. When we ask, "And what else?" the number of possibilities increases and the success rate follows suit. I once read a study that said when managers had only 2 options, their likelihood of failure exceeded 50%. But just adding a third option nearly halved that rate. Creativity doesn't come from genius, but from daring to ask one more time and with yourself. And what else is also a subtle break. It helps you restrain the instinct to give advice, because that instinct is very strong. We like to hear ourselves talk, like to be recognized as knowledgeable. But when you ask more, you force yourself to step back and let others lead. You are no longer the rescuer, you become the companion. Imagine every time you are about to open your mouth to say, I think. You stop, smile, and ask, and what else? Just a small action, but you've changed the position of the conversation. The other person will continue to speak, will see things they hadn't even realized themselves. Sometimes they pause, ponder, and softly say, no, that's probably all. That's when you know you've reached the end. I usually ask that question 3 times. The first for them to state the obvious, the second for them to start thinking deeply, and the third for them to confront what they've been avoiding. After that, I stop. A question is truly powerful, only when it ends at the right time. However, sometimes you have to change direction because not every conversation should go on forever. If you feel the energy waning, just a slight variation. Is there anything else? That question is like a gentle lid closing the exchange, yet still open enough for the other person to say more if needed. The power of "and what else" lies not in its content, but in the attitude of curiosity. It reminds us that the other person always has more than they just said, and that's true for you too. Every time you ask, you are also reflecting on yourself. Is there something I haven't seen, haven't dared to say, haven't dared to confront? In learning to ask, we also learn to embrace not knowing. A good leader isn't someone who always has the answers, but someone who knows how to maintain curiosity in moments when they think they've understood everything. Sometimes the only thing you need is a blind spot for others to shine. Someone once told me, but if you only ask who will lead, I smiled. Leadership isn't about giving orders, it's about creating the capacity for others to lead themselves. When you ask, you are sowing the seeds of confidence and autonomy in others. You are helping them discover their abilities without needing you. And one day, when they are strong enough not to need you anymore, that is true success. I once saw that change in the eyes of a young manager. Before, she always asked me, what should I do? Whenever her team faced a crisis, I just asked, and what else? At first, she hesitated, then gradually the answers began to come. By the 3rd time, she smiled and said, I think I know what I should do. That was the moment she began to become her own true leader. But to reach that point, there's another, even more powerful question, one that makes both the questioner and the question pause, as if all the noise in the room suddenly vanishes. That question is, what's the real challenge here? That question is like a lamp shining into the deepest layers of the labyrinth. Because most of the time, we are busy solving things that aren't the root cause. We treat symptoms, patch holes, put out surface fires, while the smoldering fire underneath continues to burn. Every leader has fallen into that trap, rushing into action before understanding what's truly happening. When you ask, what's the real challenge here? You force the conversation to stop. You no longer chase urgency, but return to the essence. The other person might remain silent for a long time, let them be. Because it is in that silence that the answer begins to form. Often, what they say isn't the problem you imagined. They aren't struggling with the project, but with the fear of being judged. They aren't stuck due to lack of skills, but due to a feeling of uselessness when not being listened to. The real challenge rarely lies in what to do, but in who we are in that situation. This is true not only for others, but also for yourself. Whenever you find yourself tired, caught up in countless tasks, try to stop and ask, what's the real challenge here? Sometimes you'll find it's not that there's too much work, but that you haven't dared to let go of the feeling of having to control everything. A good question can save an entire workday because it pulls us out of the trance of busyness, bringing us back to the essential. Ask the right question, and you'll save hours of arguments, weeks of repeating mistakes. Ask the wrong question, and you'll drown in an endless cycle of correction. The power of a question lies in its ability to force us to confront the truth. I once sat in a meeting where everyone argued for 40 minutes about how to improve a process. I just asked, what problem are we actually trying to solve? The room fell silent. No one could answer immediately. A few minutes later, everyone realized they were trying to patch up the consequences of a wrong decision from last month, not the current problem. One question, and the entire meeting changed direction. Therefore, whenever you are about to make a decision, ask yourself, what's the real challenge here, and what does it have to do with me? The second question is equally important because it reminds you that you are not outside the situation. Every problem has a part of our own shadow within it. If you don't dare to examine it, you will forever be solving the wrong problem. If you learn these 3 things, ask one question, ask one more time, and ask the real problem, you've come halfway on the journey. The rest is learning to listen to the answer with all the stillness of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. Only then does the question truly have a soul. Sometimes what others need most isn't advice, but validation. They want to feel heard, seen, that their story has value. And it is there that another question opens up. What do you truly want? It's no longer a question about a problem, but a question about the heart. It doesn't aim at action, but at the deepest desires of a person. I once asked that question in a seemingly meaningless conversation. The woman sat before me complaining about colleagues, her boss, her job. I listened patiently, then gently asked, "So, what do you truly want?" She was silent for a few seconds, then a few minutes, tears flowing before words appeared. She said, "I just want to be respected." All those complaints, it turned out, were just a shell covering an unnamed hurt. When you ask someone what they truly want, you're touching the deepest part of them. Many people have never been asked this question in their lives. They live according to others' expectations, out of inertia, out of fear. But when the question rings out, a crack of light opens. Some realize they've been going in the wrong direction. Some realize they don't even want what they are striving for. And sometimes you yourself will realize you've lived too long in a life that isn't your own. This question is also a mirror, because when others answer, you hear your own echo within it. There are things we once wanted but have forgotten. Desires buried under layers of responsibility. Coaching, in the end, is a journey to help people remember what they once longed for. However, the paradox lies in the fact that the more we want to help others achieve what they want, the more easily we fall into the savior trap. We jump in to give advice, solutions, action plans. We believe we are helping, but sometimes that very act deprives them of the opportunity to grow themselves. Therefore, another question arises, seemingly lazy but full of power. How can I best support you? This question sounds simple, but it is the boundary between kindness and control. When you ask, "How can I best support you?" you acknowledge that you are not sure what the other person needs. You give them back the power to decide how to receive help. You don't impose, you don't assume you know better. It is the humility of someone who truly wants to help, not to prove their usefulness. Thanks to this question, you also protect yourself from the storm of false responsibility. Because every time you agree to help with something, you are saying yes to one thing, but also saying no to other things. Every yes comes with a price. That's why the next question is equally important. If I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? How many of us have gotten lost because we don't know how to say no? We agree to every meeting, every request, every new project, then complain that we no longer have time for what's important. But the truth is, we don't lack time, we just lack the courage to refuse. That question forces us to confront our own limits. You can't do everything, and the more you try, the more you lose sight of what's essential. A friend of mine once said he felt guilty every time he refused a colleague. I asked, "So when you say yes to them, who are you saying no to?" He was silent, then smiled sadly, "To my wife and my 2 children." That was the most honest answer I'd ever heard, and I knew he understood that leadership isn't about trying to do more, but about knowing what's worth pouring all your energy into. When you dare to say no to things just to burnish your image, you truly say yes to things that have meaning. And in the illusory world of productivity, this strategic question is a map to keep you from getting lost. After all, when the conversation ends, there's a final question I always ask the other person not to close, but to open. I ask, "What was most useful to you in this conversation?" It sounds small, but it's what transforms the recent moment into a lasting memory. When the other person answers, they are not just summarizing, they are reinforcing the lesson for themselves. They realize what touched them most, and from that, turn experience into insight. As for me, I learned something else, that every conversation can become a place where people learn about themselves. That's why I love coaching. Not because it makes me more powerful, but because it makes me more silent, more present, and more curious about the world. Every question is a door, every silence is a threshold leading to awareness. And if I had to condense it all into one thing, I would say, ask less but ask deeper. Speak less, but listen more genuinely. Try less to appear knowledgeable and start truly understanding others. Because a well-timed question can change the course of an entire life. And sometimes it starts with just 4 simple words. What's going on? The hardest thing in any conversation is not speaking, but daring to ask a question that truly touches the core of the other person. People are often more afraid of questions than answers, because questions strip away the rational facade, revealing things that sometimes they themselves don't want to see. When we ask someone, "What do you truly want?" we are forcing them to confront themselves with their contradictions, fears, and deep-seated suppressions. What we truly want is rarely what we express. The woman who said she wanted to quit her job might just be seeking respect. The man who said he wanted to succeed might be looking for a sense of recognition. Every desire has an emotional core hidden beneath it, and if that core isn't touched, all solutions are merely superficial patches. That's why I always believe a well-timed question has more power than a long speech. What do you truly want? It seems simple, but it is a fierce challenge for both sides. The questioner must be patient enough to endure the silence, compassionate enough not to interject with advice. The questioned must be brave enough to be honest, not to hide behind safe answers. We are used to playing the role of helper and forget that help can also be a form of control. We say, "I just want what's best for you," but hidden beneath that is a desire to be recognized, to be needed. A mature dialogue has no room for salvation, only room for respect when two people talk as adults, as equals, with boundaries and freedom. Only then does the question truly work. I've seen so many people fall into the vicious cycle of rescuer, victim, persecutor. The rescuer wants to help, but the more they help, the weaker the other person becomes. The more the victim is helped, the more they lose the ability to stand up. The more the persecutor speaks, the further they drift from reality. That cycle repeats, exhausting both. Only by stopping and asking, "What do you truly want?" does the cycle begin to dissolve. When someone answers honestly, a miracle happens. They no longer wait for someone to show them the way. They see their own path. They don't need to be rescued, they just need to be understood. And at that moment, we, the questioner, also change. We are no longer the one who brings light to them, but merely the one who holds the lamp so they can see themselves. The question about desire not only helps us understand others, but also helps us understand ourselves. When we ask someone, "What do you want?" a part of us is also asking, "What about me?" We begin to realize that what we've pursued for so long isn't truly what we need. We learn to detach from ambitions borrowed from family, society, or the fear of being left behind. And when the answer appears, it rarely echoes like a proclamation. Sometimes it's just a whisper. "I want to be heard. I want to be respected. I want to be trusted." It sounds small, but these small things shape all the big decisions in a person's life. In fact, every profound conversation begins with genuine curiosity. Not curiosity to analyze, but curiosity to truly understand. Curiosity makes us sit longer, listen more carefully, ask a little more. Sometimes just one more question, and what else? Opens another door. So I always remind myself to start by listening. Don't try to fix, don't try to advise. Just ask, then be silent to give the other person space to discover themselves. Silence is not passivity, but space for truth to emerge. Someone once said the best questions all start with "what" instead of "why." Why makes people defensive. What opens up possibilities. Asking, "Why did you do that?" is like an accusation, but asking, "What led you to choose that path?" is an invitation to explore together. Just by changing one word, we change the entire atmosphere of the conversation. A good questioner doesn't need to have the answers. They just need to hold the space for others to find them. The power of a question isn't in the words, but in the presence of the questioner. When we are truly present without judgment, without haste, the other person will feel it. And when they feel it, they will open up. But to do that, we must first learn to tolerate uncertainty. Because in the silence between the question and the answer, there will be moments when we don't know what to do. The instinct to interject, to help, will urge us on. But hold back. Don't kill the moment with haste. A powerful question always comes with patience. Patience to wait for the other person to understand themselves, and also for us to understand them. Sometimes we have to repeat, sometimes we have to go in circles. But as long as sincerity is maintained, the core will reveal itself. And then, when the other person expresses what they truly want, we will see everything become lighter, no more tension, no more right or wrong. Just two people looking in the same direction. That is the moment when coaching becomes art, no longer a technique of asking, but a journey of awareness, where each question not only illuminates others, but also illuminates us. So, before you intend to help anyone, stop and ask, what do you truly want? Then be silent to let them find the answer themselves, and for you to learn to trust the power of silence. We often think that helping is the most noble act, but the deeper I delve into the human world, the more I understand that not all help truly helps. Sometimes, in our effort to do good, we inadvertently take away another's opportunity to grow. Every time we say, let me do it for you, we are taking away a moment when they could have stood up themselves. Therefore, I learned that instead of rushing into action, start with the question, how can I best support you? That question is small but embodies mindfulness. It doesn't come from pity but from respect. It says, I am here, ready to support, but the choice is still yours. I don't know exactly what you need, so I ask for you to articulate it. The interesting thing is that when asked this question, many people are flustered. They are used to being helped in ways others think are good, not used to saying what they need themselves. But when they start to speak, you will see clearer than ever. They don't need a hero, they need a companion. I call this the lazy question. Not because it's passive, but because it refuses to do things for others. It helps you curb the savior instinct, the urge that exhausts so many leaders and parents. People think they are giving, but they are actually depleting themselves. We think we are freeing others, but we are actually binding them to us. There is a psychological concept called the drama triangle, with 3 main roles: victim, rescuer, and persecutor. When you jump in to help without being asked, you immediately step into the role of rescuer and inadvertently turn the other person into a victim. This cycle repeats, exhausting both. But when you ask, how can I best support you? You break that triangle. You return the power to the other person so they can reclaim the lead role in their own story. I once asked this question to a young colleague who was struggling with his first project. He looked at me surprised, as if he couldn't believe his ears. After a few seconds, he replied, I just need you to listen, don't rush to fix my mistakes. And I understood. Sometimes the best way to help is to do nothing but listen. Sometimes people will respond with requests beyond your capabilities. That's when you learn another skill, setting boundaries. If they ask for more than you can give, remember you have the right to say no. The question, how can I best support you, does not mean a promise to help at all costs. It's a way to open the door to an honest conversation about capabilities and real needs. Sometimes I use softer variations like, what would make this easier for you? Or, which part would you like me to support you with? That phrasing is softer but still clear. It shows goodwill while maintaining boundaries. Because if you can't protect your own boundaries, you can't help anyone in the long run. Kindness should not deplete us. Smart help isn't about giving everything, but about giving the right thing that's needed. If you keep helping to be thanked, that's selfish help. If you help and forget yourself, that's unwise help. Only when you know how to ask, how to pause, and how to refuse does help truly become nurturing. I remember someone once asked me, if I don't help, what will they think of me? I replied, if you help incorrectly, they won't think anything of you because they'll be too busy thinking about themselves. We cannot live other people's lives, and no one should live ours for us. Growth begins the moment we let others take responsibility for themselves. In such conversations, silence once again becomes power. When the other person is searching for an answer, don't interrupt. Just maintain eye contact, breathe slowly so they feel safe to speak their truth. Fewer words, deeper impact in the process. Sometimes your quiet presence is the mirror that helps others see themselves clearly. When you practice long enough, you will find that the question, how can I best support you, is not just for others, but for yourself every time you feel busy or tired. Stop and ask, who am I helping and why? Sometimes you'll realize you're trying to prove something, not truly helping anyone. Sometimes you'll realize you're avoiding a feeling of helplessness by overhelping. A great leader is not someone who solves all problems, but someone who teaches others to solve their own problems. The question, how can I best support you, is the bridge to that transformation. It frees you from the burden of having answers and frees others from feeling useless. And then, when the relationship is reestablished on a foundation of equality, a new clarity emerges. You realize that to truly help someone, you must first choose what is truly worth helping, because not every call deserves an answer. Not every yes should be spoken. Sometimes your refusal is the greatest gift you can give. That's when we move to another level of maturity, the level of conscious selectivity, where every yes carries responsibility and every no is a self-affirmation. There's a paradox that most successful people fall into. the more successful they become, the easier it is for them to get caught in the trap of saying yes. They agree to too many things: new projects, new ideas, meetings, favors, even things they deeply know they shouldn't. They fear missing out, fear disappointing, fear being seen as uncommitted. But ultimately, these very yesies exhaust them. I used to be like that. Every morning I woke up, my to-do list was longer than my patience. I tried to push myself to keep everything running, while what was most important gradually faded away. Then one day I heard someone ask, "If you say yes to this, what are you saying no to?" That question was like a gentle yet deep knife. I realized every yes is a hidden no. When I said yes to others, I was saying no to my own time, to my creativity, to my most valuable relationships. This is a strategic question, not confrontational, but powerful enough to change the way we live. It forces us to look squarely at our limits. It makes us understand that energy, attention, and time are finite resources. If we don't manage them, they will be consumed by others. We grow up in a culture that celebrates multitasking, but few dare to say that multitasking is actually just a way to kill focus. The more we say yes to many things, the further we drift from our core. Busyness becomes a form of addiction. We do a lot to prove our worth, but the more we do, the more our true value is diluted. True strategy isn't about choosing more, but about daring to choose less. When we stop and ask, "If I agree to this, what am I refusing?" we begin to act consciously. Perhaps the answer will be painful, because sometimes what we have to refuse is something we once prided ourselves on. But no evolution happens if we don't let go. I once worked with a group of leaders struggling with overwhelm. Each person carried dozens of projects. No one dared to drop any. I asked them to write down 3 things they were going to say no to in the coming month. Then I asked, "So, what 3 things will you say no to?" The room fell silent. They had never considered that saying yes was a commitment with a cost. And as they began to list the things they would stop: superfluous meetings, undefined initiatives, tasks just for reporting, you could feel the atmosphere lighten. They had just expanded space for what was truly important. Every choice has a price. The question is whether we dare to see that price. A good leader is not someone who carries everything, but someone who knows how to choose, how to say no to things that pull them away from their goals. Even if that might disappoint others, because they understand that every time we appease someone to maintain harmony, we are betraying a part of ourselves. Someone asked me, "If I say no, will they think I'm selfish?" I replied, "Selfishness isn't about setting boundaries, it's about breaking others' boundaries and then claiming it's for their good." Saying no isn't rejecting people, but protecting what makes us ourselves. Only when we know how to conserve energy for what's meaningful do we truly have something to give. In a world that values consensus, the person who dares to say no is the one who dares to live differently, not to rebel, but to be true to their core. Every well-placed no is a powerful yes to something more worthwhile. When you decline an unnecessary invitation, you're saying yes to a quiet afternoon with your child. When you refuse a meaningless project, you're saying yes to time for reflection, creativity, or simply breathing. The power of choice lies in the ability to pause before agreeing. Don't react instinctively. Pause for a few seconds and ask, "Is this worth the trade-off?" If the answer isn't clear, it's almost certainly a no. Smart people aren't afraid of missing out. They are only afraid of losing what's truly important. When you live by that principle, you'll see clarity spread to all aspects of your life. Work becomes less burdensome, relationships less hazy. You no longer feel pulled in every direction. You walk with purpose, speak less, but every word carries weight. And the most interesting thing is that when you start saying no, others will also learn to respect their own time and boundaries. An honest refusal can teach others to grow. It sends the message that true collaboration only comes when both parties are free to choose. Ultimately, we understand that living is not about accumulating as much as possible, but about retaining enough to remain ourselves. The world will always be noisy, full of temptations, full of invitations. But the person who knows what they want, how to help, and is ready to say no at the right time, that person not only leads others, but also leads their own life. And so, the circle of growth closes, not with victory, but with wisdom. Because in the journey of trying to lead the world, we have learned the most important thing. Leadership, first and foremost, is knowing how to choose. The most surprising thing in any conversation is not the answer, but the moment people pause to think about what is truly useful to them. In that moment, the world around them seems to slow down. The speaker no longer speaks just to speak. The listener no longer listens just to react. Both step out of the familiar zone of exchange and into the zone of awareness. I've witnessed hundreds of conversations end with no one remembering what just happened. People nod, smile, then turn away. Not because they don't care, but because the conversation flew by too quickly, with no time to sink in. People don't learn from experience, they learn from reflecting on experience. And to create that moment, all it takes is one question. What was most useful to you in this conversation? Don't see this as a polite ritual. This is a question that opens up depth and anchor that helps experience become understanding. When the other person is forced to choose what they found most useful, they begin to reorganize their thinking, sifting out what truly matters. This isn't just remembering, it's a process of reconstructing perception. This question, seemingly small, holds a crucial key in cognitive psychology. To learn something, we must ourselves create a connection to it. When people say, "What was most useful to me was," they are forcing their brain to recreate information in their own way. They don't just remember, they understand. That explains why, according to neuroscientists, generating connections oneself makes memories much more durable than just listening or taking notes. I recall the EASD model that many researchers have affirmed: encoding, attention, self-generation, and time-lapse. To learn deeply, one must focus, self-generate, feel emotion, and have pauses. This question meets all four criteria. It pulls the listener out of the passive flow, forces their attention, makes them actively create meaning, attaches emotion to what they've just learned, and then gives them a quiet moment to feel. And there's something even better. That question isn't just useful for the person being asked, but for the questioner too. When I ask, "What was most useful to you?" I'm also reflecting on how I led the conversation. I know what truly resonated with them and what didn't. That question becomes a feedback mirror, helping me see my own limits without needing any reports. A conversation is only truly complete when it leaves a moment of realization. This question is the path to that moment. It closes by opening. When the other person states what was most useful, we know the conversation had real value, however small. And that's enough to make them want to talk again next time. Someone once told me, "Asking that way, isn't it too dogmatic?" I smiled. "No, if you ask with genuine curiosity, not to evaluate but to learn together." So I always ask in a gentle tone, without expectation, without imposition. "So, what was most useful to you today?" Sometimes they answer right away, sometimes they remain silent for a long time. And it is in that silence that the most important thing is born. When they answer, pay attention to their eyes. You might see a spark the moment they realize something they didn't even know they had just learned. That is the moment coaching truly happens, not when you give excellent advice, but when they see what is useful for themselves. I once asked that question to a young manager after a contentious exchange. He thought for a long time, then said, "The most useful thing was realizing I always answer too quickly. We don't need anything more." That answer alone spoke volumes about his learning journey. The magic is that when people state what was most useful, they are linking emotion with knowledge, and emotion is what remains longest in human memory. Science calls this the peak end effect. We tend to remember the climactic moment and the ending most. Therefore, if a conversation ends with a question that makes people feel enlightened, they will remember the entire experience with positive emotions. Sometimes we think coaching is a journey to find answers, but no, it's a journey to find questions powerful enough to make others stop and think. And the question, "What was most useful to you?" is proof that sometimes a well-timed question is more profound than 100 pieces of advice. And when you start using this question regularly, you'll notice a subtle change. People not only start thinking differently, but they also treat you differently. They feel heard, respected, empowered. You are no longer the one who talks the most, but you are the one who helps others learn the most. That is the essence of coaching a conversation that knows when to stop at the right time so that what is valuable can settle. In the world of people who work with people, it's not just how you say things, but how you end them that matters. Many people think a conversation ends when they run out of things to say, but in fact, it only truly ends when the listener takes away something useful for themselves. The question, "What was most useful to you?" is like a subtle latch, closing the exchange while simultaneously opening a space for reflection. The special thing about this question is that it doesn't demand others to learn anything in an academic sense, but only to choose one thing that was most valuable. This limitation makes it powerful. When we are forced to choose one thing, we have to think deeper. And when we vocalize that thing, the brain automatically solidifies the connection, turning insight into lasting memory. People often think learning is a long, complex process, requiring time and systems. But in reality, sometimes just one well-timed question is enough to activate the entire mechanism of deep learning. This is what neuroscientists call deep learning, learning not just from action, but from looking back at the reasons behind the action. This question specifically creates the second learning loop, where awareness is refined, not just skill. I remember once in a coaching session, a woman sat quietly for a long time after being asked that question. Then she said, "The most useful thing was realizing I had never given myself a chance to stop." That answer wasn't just about the session, but about the way she was living her life. When people pause to think like that, it's no longer just a work session, but a small turning point in their lives. Compared to other questions like, "What did you learn?" or "What impressed you?" This question has a different power. It doesn't test, doesn't evaluate, doesn't make people feel scrutinized. On the contrary, it assumes the conversation was useful. All that's needed is to pick out the most useful part. That makes the listener feel respected, not interrogated. They don't need to prove what they learned, they just need to be honest about their experience. Another subtle point, this question is personalized. By adding "to you," it immediately changes the entire atmosphere. It's no longer "What should you learn?" but "What was most useful to you?" Just those two words make the listener step out of the role of student and return to themselves. They become the owner of the lesson, not a passive recipient of it. There's a psychological principle called the peak-end rule. People don't remember an entire experience, they only remember two moments, the peak and the end. If a conversation ends with a question that makes people reflect, they will retain positive feelings about the entire conversation. In other words, this question not only helps others learn, but also makes them want to return to you next time. If the beginning of the conversation opens with, "What's on your mind?" then the question, "What was most useful to you?" is the perfect closing lid. These two questions are like two ends of a thread, creating a complete framework for any dialogue, opening with curiosity, closing with awareness. Such a conversation not only solves problems, but also sows the seeds for new conversations. Coaching is not just asking to know, but asking to learn, and learning is not just for the person being asked. Every time I ask, "What was most useful to you?" I also ask myself, "What was most useful to me?" That question transforms coaching from a one-way action into a two-way relationship where both grow. Sometimes the other person asks me back, "What about you? What was most useful?" And I always answer honestly. No flowery language, just the truth. "The most useful thing for me was seeing you stop to think." Or, "The most useful thing was realizing sometimes I need to be silent more." That honesty makes the conversation more human. There is no longer a distance between the guide and the guided. I believe that a profound conversation is one where both sides learn something. And if you end with this question, that almost always happens. Because no one can answer, "What was most useful to you?" without pausing a little, looking inward, and listening to themselves. That's why, whether in a meeting room, a coffee shop, or on a train platform, I always maintain the habit of asking that question. It's not just a technique, it's a way of life. Because when people know how to ask themselves what is most useful, they are also learning to detach themselves from the whirlwind of life to see what truly matters. And if one day you find someone asking you that question back, smile. Because then you'll know that you have sown the seed of mindfulness, the seed of continuous learning. Every great habit starts with a small action. The question, "What was most useful to you?" is no different. At first, it's just a gentle closing line in a conversation. But when repeated long enough, it becomes a habit of mindfulness, a way of living where every encounter carries true value. To make it a natural part of myself, I learn to associate it with specific moments. When a conversation is about to end, when a sense of silence spreads, that's the signal. Instead of rushing to summarize or give advice, I pause and ask, just a few seconds. But those few seconds transform the entire exchange from done to learned. Habits are formed not by what we know, but by what we consciously repeat. In reality, people are often attracted to grand actions. They want to change entire systems, organizations, or themselves in one go. But what creates lasting transformation always comes from small things: a question, a look, a pause. Coaching isn't truly about how many questions we ask, but about asking the right one at the right time. I've coached many leaders and realized that most of them don't lack competence, they just lack the pause. They are too quick to react, too good at providing solutions, but they forget that solutions are only valuable when others realize them for themselves. This question is the tool to create that pause the space for insight to emerge. And once you've seen its power, you'll want to use it not just at work, but everywhere. In meetings, I ask. In an email concluding a project, I also ask. In conversations with friends or children, sometimes I gently say, "What was most useful to you today, my dear?" No need for length, no need for seriousness, just an invitation to reflect together. A simple question that can change how people connect. When the answer comes, receive it with respect. Acknowledging the other person's answer is part of the art of asking. If they say something true, respond with genuine listening. Don't interrupt, don't explain further, just say, "I understand," or "That sounds valuable." When people feel validated, they will naturally open up more deeply next time. And don't forget, coaching doesn't only happen when we sit face to face. Every communication channel can become a space for questions. You can ask via text, in a report, or even at the end of a presentation. The important thing is not the form, but the spirit. Every exchange can be an opportunity to learn. Gradually, you will realize that this question begins to change not only how you communicate, but also how you live. You speak less, listen more. You no longer rush to prove yourself right, but want to understand what's truly happening. Ask less, but each question carries the weight of mindfulness. Sometimes on late afternoons, when everything has passed, I ask myself, what was most useful today? Some days I realize I learned to be more patient. Some days it's just realizing that silence is also a form of caring. And some days I don't have a clear answer. But just asking is enough to make me slow down a bit, become a bit more aware. That is the nature of true learning, not memorization, but consciousness. When we ask this question every day, we are training our minds in the habit of reflecting instead of just rushing forward. And the longer we practice, the shorter the gap between doing and understanding what we are doing. At some point, these two things merge, and then you will see that coaching is no longer a skill, but a way of life. You ask to understand, not to control. You help others without taking away their freedom. You learn from everyone you meet and leave them with a question instead of advice. A well-timed question can become a guiding light for both sides. When all journeys conclude, we realize that the path of the leader is not the path of talking more, but the path of knowing when to be silent, knowing what to ask, and knowing how to listen deeply. Ask less, ask deeper, ask truly. That is the art of living for those who understand themselves and others. And if one day in a casual conversation you hear someone say to another, "So what was most useful to you?" then smile. Because at that moment, you will know that the seed of a good habit has germinated, and this world has just become a little more mindful. We live in an age where everyone wants to be the one who knows. Everyone wants to have answers, opinions, solutions. But this book gently places a hand on our shoulder and says, "Learn to not know beforehand so you can truly listen." Perhaps that is the greatest paradox, but also the most profound lesson. The power of a leader lies not in the ability to speak, but in the art of asking questions from, "What do you want?" to "How can I best support you?" to "What was most useful to you?" Each question on that journey is a small step leading people out of the illusion of control. The deeper we ask, the more we realize that wanting to control others is a manifestation of not yet understanding ourselves. And when we stop to ask truly, not to prove but to understand, a miracle happens. Others begin to learn, and we begin to grow. The lesson of this book is not just for leaders, but for anyone who has ever spoken to another human being. Because every dialogue can become a training ground for mindfulness. No one needs another person trying to fix them. They need someone patient enough to listen to who they are becoming. And perhaps what this book truly wants to say lies in another question, hidden beneath all those others. Do we have enough courage to step back and trust the wisdom of others? When we let go of the role of rescuer, when we stop seeing ourselves as the center, we create space for others to blossom in their own way. That is how true influence is formed, not through imposition, but through permission. Thinking carefully, not all questions are outwardly directed. Sometimes the biggest question is the one we ask ourselves. Am I truly listening, or just waiting for my turn to speak? Do I help others because they need it, or because I need to feel useful? Am I fully focused on understanding others, or just trying to prove that I understand? It is in these questions that we see the shadow of humility, something modern people are losing. Coaching at its deepest level is a practice of humility. It teaches us to slow down, set our ego aside, and allow silence to have its place. A true conversation is not where we shine, but where others find their light. When you close this book, there will probably be no applause, no feeling of having understood everything, only a very gentle silence, as if you are sitting alone after a long conversation and asking yourself, can I become someone who knows how to ask more than someone who knows how to speak? If that question appears within you, then the journey has begun. Because the most important thing this book leaves behind is not a skill, but an attitude towards people. Ask less, listen deeply, slow down, don't let words get between understanding. Every question is an opportunity to connect, to learn, to reflect on oneself. And if you practice that every day, gradually, every conversation around you will change, no longer an exchange of information, but an exchange of mindfulness. Ultimately, perhaps the most thought-provoking thing is that in a noisy world, the person who knows how to ask is the one who can create silence. And in that silence, what is truly useful will speak. So, before stepping into your next conversation, don't rush to speak. Pause for a moment, look into the eyes of the person opposite you, and gently ask, what is most useful to you right now? Then be silent. The rest of life will answer itself.